Hello, my friends, assuming you're my friends, but even if you are my enemies, hello to you as well. I am here for another random podcast, Janthopodcast. This time, I felt inspired to talk about how I believe spiritual evolution is going in a cycle, and we are actually at a turn now where we're almost resetting to it at a time long before. The idea of things moving in cycles is nothing new. We see it everywhere. We see it in nature with like the seasons. We see it in obviously astrology with the rotations and orbits. We see it with star signs. But we also see it in other places. We see it obviously in a spiritual sense. We see it in the idea of reincarnation, which is fundamental to all the Eastern branches of spirituality. But we also see it in general society, in the way trends seem to be cyclic, and even things like politics tend to kind of have this pendulum motion, how people seem to favor the left and the right and the left and the right, you know, because what is a 2-point cycle if not a pendulum? So with that in mind, I'd like to talk about this in a perspective of how spiritual evolution seems to be following a trend like this. And what's important to note is that a circle is a wheel, it rolls. So it advances. So it's not like when you reach the point that you were in the beginning, that you're exactly where you were. No, you've advanced. Each point on the cycle is not going to be the same as it was when you were there before. It's a constant evolution and progress and development. So even though now we're coming to ideas that are very ancient, I feel, we are still an advanced version of what that might be. So let's get to it with the first point on the circle. Tens of thousands of years BC, there's this idea called animism. It's not really a fair term. It's kind of a term that modern day scholars have used as this giant umbrella to shove indigenous concepts beneath. But they are valid in the way that there's common threads between these beliefs. The basic belief of animism is that there's a spiritual energy in everything. Not just in people and in animals, but in the rocks, and the blades of grass, and the ocean, and the sky. But even more interesting would be like a sound. So if I go, there's a spiritual essence to that specific sound, like it has its own personality in a way. Or if I draw a 8 number in the sand, that 8 now it contains that energy, that spiritual energy within that symbol. Everything has this. It's almost like so everything kind of that's tangible, everything that can be like differentiated from something else, contains a specific piece of the spiritual energy. This is called animism, and it's why it's very in tune with the nature worship. These ancient people, which were on every continent, independently coming up with these ideas and rituals and whatnots that revolved around this idea that everything had a spiritual essence. But of course, all of these things were connected by the one spiritual essence. You know, it's not that things were separate. These people were very, very in tune with their nature and very, very in tune with how the sun would help the crops grow, which would feed them, which would also feed animals, which would feed them, and then how they would, bury the dead, and it was a lot of it was about respect and this mutual kind of system where every component depended on every other component. So even though they segregated these each entity as having a spiritual kind of core, they still were very aware that there was a grander system at work. So that's kind of step one. Scholars are in debate about this, but when you talk about what the earliest religion ever was, generally that's the one that comes up. I've heard that, upwards of 100,000 BC, there was evidence of this, and as I say, it's all over the world. So, is it a religion? Is it not a religion? Whatever. It's a spiritual philosophy that is argued more often than not as the original religion. There's a kind of a midpoint between the next step, which is like what's known as shamanism. I'm not going to go too much into this, but I'm just going to quickly touch on it. Shamanism is kind of like animism, but there became these mediators of people that believed they were more spiritually in tune with these spiritual essences, as well as the spirits of the people that have passed away. They believed they could communicate with these spirits, and they also believed that they could influence these spirits. That was their role in their society. Maybe they could. I don't know. The only thing I hate about that practice is that it still continues today. You'll see it in priests and rabbis and gurus and cult leaders, and there's these people that actually believe that they are a communicator between you and your God. I'm not against many things, but I'm against that. I'm open to all things, but not that. That to me is like, how fucking dare you say that you have some way a path between me and my God? That to me is rude, blasphemous, personal journey, none of your business. I grew up a Catholic, and there was a man, big fat priest man, who used to forgive me for my sins because that was the power he believed he had. And I was like, Catholic priest, huh? You got any sins? Got any sins, Father? Anyway, I never was any kind of victim in my Catholic church. So respect to my priest, who is long dead. The second part of this cycle is when things get super interesting. But you can see how the evolution was very, very natural. So you have these energies within different things that the animists were looking at. So there was this weather, the rain would be like a spiritual entity, the sun would be a spiritual entity, the crops would be a spiritual entity. As would kind of expressions, like war could be one, fertility. So you see where we're going with this. The polytheistic understanding of the world is where they personified these components. The important ones became figures, characters, with tangible physical features, and often these grand mythological backstories. Now there's a big debate on why this happened or what this was. You get cynics or just general pessimistic people who consider this to be manipulation of humans. I actually think it was the opposite. This is my theory as an optimist, that I think there were people that were more in tune with the world and this kind of trade of energy whereby you give a certain vibe out and you get a certain vibe in. And this is something that we're going to discuss further as we go along. But there was this kind of idea of like, we can communicate with nature easier if we personify it, if we can get people to kind of make friends with it. So instead of having this kind of just unfathomable, electrical, hypothetical, invisible idea behind everything, let's break it down. Let's compartmentalize pieces of this world that we find ourselves in so that people can easier digest the ideas. And we're talking about people that are thousands of years BC, And so it was difficult for them to grasp certain ideas. And, logic was only so far, whereas spirituality was much further than what we are now. Our spirituality has ground down, which I'm going to go into further. But, back in those days, it was all still very mysterious and lovely and exciting and magical. Life was not about rational and logic 1 + 1 = 2 type of styles. It was more about like, wow, what is this crazy stuff? There's got to be something behind all this. And so I believe there were people that were more spiritually in tuned, and they helped people who were lesser so by coming up with stories and characters to help communicate with these animistic concepts better. Ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, obviously Hinduism, and then all the ones in Asia, Japanese, Shinto, and there's tons of them all over. Norse, they're all doing this. Not because they were stupid, because they were fucking clever. Taking components of nature, turning them into figures that we could communicate with, and thereby put out a certain message or hope or just kind of, even just to give them a sense of like divinity, or some kind of a sense of like control. It's really just about making the idea of spirituality more manageable. That's what I believe. Or there were actually these gods running around. But we gotta live in the now. But still, most of these religions still had a kind of undercurrent of connection. All the deities kind of worked together, and they worked with the people, and the people worked together, and you needed the one, and you needed the other, and there was all these things about them working together. There was still this complete picture where everything was connected on a plane of divinity, especially like Hinduism. Hinduism was the best at this. Brahman, there was always like everything existed within a bigger plane of divinity. This one kind of, I like to say it's like this one God, but that's the pantheistic of how everything as a collective is God. But you could look at it in many other ways. But just this kind of undercurrent system. There's a system at work where everything was dependent on everything else, which is just a reflection of the understanding of nature. As you can see with something like the ecosystem, which again is another cycle. So, what happened after polytheism is very, very interesting. There was a religion called Atonism, started in ancient Egypt. It was the first, where Aton, this god from the polytheistic canon, announced to the pharaoh at the time, and I forget his name, but he announced to the pharaoh, he said, "I am the one true God. People must just worship me." And he said, "All right." And he started to order that. All these beautiful polytheistic temples and writings and images were destroyed, replaced with Aton, which Aton himself was actually a symbol of the sun. But also, very interestingly, there were inscriptions underneath these images of Aton as the sun, where they said, "He's not the sun. This is just the best we've got, but he's indescribable what he actually is." I could go so deep into that, but I've got to stick on topic. Anyway, Atonism failed, but it's historically the first what's known as monotheistic religion. Polytheistic, second step. Third step, monotheistic. Now, Zoroastrianism and Judaism came after that. Not too long, couple of hundred years. Both of them were monotheistic. Exact same thing happened. A deity within the polytheistic canon spoke to a guy, said, "I am the one true God," and then that guy tried to convince everyone else. it's crazy that these stories are exactly the same throughout. And curiously, fast forward to Islam, like 1,000 years later, and same thing happened. Polytheistic deity spoke to one guy, said, "I'm the one true God." But I think it's like it was just the nature of the times. It was the evolution. This was how this was going to happen. Polytheism was one thing, but then there was kind of, I believe that what was happening was this understanding, which was, no, okay, we're segregating these things, but this underlying system that I keep talking about, that's the real thing. It's not that there's all these little gods. It's that it's all one God. So that was a very natural progress of going, hey, we should stop breaking this all down now. Let's unify it. But unfortunately, you see, this is the problem with this, and you'll notice this. With each step, it goes forward, and then there's a hazy area, and people are still left behind, and then some people are still transitioning. So it's always like, there's always going to be this conflict of beliefs. And, so this was the thing. Whereas it should have been, actually, we're all unified, guys. We're all saying the same thing. The opposite happened. It was like, there's one true God, but it's our true God. And another place would say, no. There's one true God, but it's our true God. Another place would be like, nah, there is 100 gods. You're all wrong. And then what happens? Mass loads of conflict. But that's just the nature of human as well. Like and the nature of nature is conflict. Evolution itself is based on conflict, which is, if you've ever read a little book called the Janthopodcast Bible, you would know a bit more about that. But not here to do that. So that's became the predominant idea, and in some ways, a large percentage of the world are still there. We're talking about step 3, the monotheistic step. But then, interestingly enough, India, which is a very progressive, in many ways, it's very forward, fast country, nation of people. Hindus, they're still at stage 2. They're still very polytheistic. So that's what I'm saying. It's very interesting. But that's a big point that I'm going to come back to very soon. But for now, the majority of the world, especially in the Western world, believes in a monotheistic God. The 2 biggest religions in the world are Islam and Christianity. What is it, 3 billion followers together? I forget, something like that. Christianity is getting smaller. Islam is getting bigger, though. But, and according to both of them, or especially according to Islam, it's the same God. Even if you can kind of disprove that, the paper trail doesn't match. But who's to say? Definitely not me. Definitely not me. But monotheistic, phase 3, a lot of people are still there. Because it's a lot of religions were really based on this. That's the point. As far as that goes, there's these religious organizations, businesses, if you will, that are dependent on these doctrines that have very strict rules and different rituals and customs and whatever have you. And it's in their best interest that people stay there. So there's a lot of brainwashing and scare tactics, but also there's a lot of beauty in it. And I must say, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of Islam. I'm a big fan of Judaism. I'm a big fan of Christianity. More and more as time goes on, because I see the beauty in it, and I see that a lot of people do use it correctly. There's a lot of power there, and it can be a beautiful, beautiful thing. But unfortunately, of course, with power becomes power-hungry people who exploit it, and they target people who are perhaps spiritually vulnerable. So there is that going on, but of course there is. You can look at any industry, it doesn't matter what it is. People are being exploited. It's like humans have this kind of dark side as a collective, but we have a light side as well. So I prefer to look on the light side, and religion has huge light sides, and even like more now than ever, there's so much more acceptance now than ever, and I think that kind of goes into what I'm saying. So from this monotheistic world, the 4th step is kind of even closer to where we are now. In a way, I don't know why I keep saying that, but number 4 was when science started to come in. Because people lost it when you have these holy men, as I spoke about before, holy men like the Catholic establishment, fiddling with children. It got really difficult to come back from that. And I think kind of a lot of people went, doesn't look like a holy man. And you see that kind of thing in other religions too. It's not fair to just target Catholics, although it's just monstrous, their examples. But people started looking for answers in science. And science led to a kind of wiping out of this religious ideals and more going, I want proof. I want logic, I want proof, I want you to show me the answers. Otherwise, why should I believe this? Which is fair. I think it is fair. And because, all the things that are promised in these scriptures have not come true. And yeah, there's just so much of that is very ugly and based in power grabbing. So I get that. But there's the atheism that comes. And agnosticism, which I refer to myself as a lot of the time. I don't believe I can know anything. It's all an illusion anyway. I don't know. Is there anyone even alive but me? I don't know. I'm definitely talking to myself right now, at least. Okay, but still, so where we're at as science has become the new god. It needs to be scientifically proven, and I have a lot to say about that, and maybe one day I'll go into that. But the point is, that's kind of was the most natural next step. It was like, where is the evidence? Why is all this stuff happening? Horrible people are getting away with murder, which was completely against what was supposed to happen. And so now people are now favoring logic. So that's a growing demographic. And that's the fourth step. Science, or non-believing. This kind of just wiping the slate clean. But there is now a fifth step, which I think is very interesting. And this is now going ahead of where we are. A lot of people are here on the fifth step of this cycle. The fifth and final step before we loop. This is where some people are, but it's growing fast. And this will eventually become the next thing. This will start to favor, people will start to move away from the atheistic, blind, scientific, classical science of step 4, and they'll move into step 5, which is where we start getting to the quantum mechanics realm. Obviously that term gets thrown around a lot. It's greatly misunderstood. It's become a bit of a buzz term, really, in regards to mysticism and all that. But there is such parallels that people are starting to connect up these dots, where they're saying, hang on a minute. So you're telling me that there's kind of these tiny, tiny things that everything is made up of. Atoms. But the atoms are made up of nucleus, protons and neutrons, which are so much smaller than the atom. But the majority of the atom is this dense hyperspeed movement of electrons. And these things, this energy, intense energy, is so crazy how this energy is so fast that's why things appear solid. Even though things aren't solid at all, because the density of the vibration of this electricity is so intense that these things, that atoms repel each other, and that's why you can't walk through walls. That's such an intense, but it's happening on such a tiny level that you can't even see it, even no one's even really seen it. You can measure it, but you can't see it. So anyway, quantum mechanics is kind of the most advanced sciences, really, because nobody knows what the hell is going on. I mean, if you ever meet someone who tries to tell you what quantum mechanics is, I mean, of course, there's things that we know. I can give it a good go. But one thing that I've noticed that every proper quantum scientist agrees on is that they have no freaking idea. Even the model of what we think the atom is they're not actually 100% sure. And how it works, and there's different phenomenons of entanglement theory or observer effect. They don't know how or what or anything. And if it suddenly did something different, they'll just be I don't know. They don't know. That's the one common ground. People don't know. But all they know is that standard, classical, Newton science that we have required our entire lives in order to measure and calculate how the reality is working. None of that shit applies when you start going down to quantum levels. That's what's so amazing about it. So it's a whole new field. So that's where science is going. I feel like that's like where exploration is going. It's all fine and good, looking higher and higher into the stars, and that's great. But I think, it's so vast. You're not going to, I think the real exploration is going down, 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 down to the infinities of subatomic particles. That's where the true curtain is that we're starting to peek behind of what reality is. Madness. Just want to mention that right now I'm about a 20-minute walk from CERN, where I'm sitting right now. So yeah, where they're fucking colliding particles, like where all these discoveries being made is like just down the road. So how apt that I'm doing this podcast here. So anyway, that's all fine, but that's still very science, and science. Then there becomes a big debate, and this is where we start crossing over. And this is when I'm talking about the cycle. I see the next step from quantum mechanics is coming back round to step one. Now, first of all, you're going to have people on the scientific side saying, fuck you, man. Don't come with your quantum mysticism. Stop dirtying up the science. Your stupid divine quest for meaning doesn't belong here, blah 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 blah. But then on the other side you have religious people going, fuck you, man. Science is stupid, God is above all else, this is all a perfect picture, He's created us and watching us. So there's these two flip sides. That's fine, whatever you want to do. But there's many of us, many of us, and a growing number of us who live in the middle, who are going, I see how the science and the spirituality are connecting here in such a profound way, a glorious way, a way that's so beautiful that it gives me a sense of true insignificance in my life, and which in itself helps peace and quiet of the mind. So let's what do we mean by that? Well, let's get back to where we were when we go to animism. It's like, okay, so what is it? Well, this underlying energy field, but separated components of energy. Well, now we're actually starting to see this kind of thing scientifically. First of all, the electron itself. By the way, every electron is exactly the same. They're all identical, which in itself has many theories. So there's this kind of energy, like spirits itself can be interchangeable with many other words. It's always kind of soul. The soul always seems to be the vitality. It's an energetical thing. Electricity that powers the person. When you die, there's no more electricity, that's why you're not moving. The body's still all there, but something leaves you. It's like this powerful electricity. That's quite directly, literally what electricity is. Electricity is a throttling of electrons. And electrons are what we are all created from without fail. Everything has this life in it. Everything, even the space between you and your computer right now is just buzzing with it. So there is this huge field, and that agrees with this whole system thing of this kind of like God-like overarching figure that we all exist in, this plane. But also, it's segregating things off. The trading of electrons by nuclei, is how molecules are made. Everything is created by this process, and that's molecules are what make up everything. So we are now getting sectioned off into this kind of tangible reality where things are actually things, despite being completely the same building blocks. These attributes are being presented, capturing different essences. That is essentially what animism kind of was. It was recognizing this energetic spirit in each item, each object, no matter what it was. And so we could see how that is an electron, could very well be compared to electron idea. Now, obviously, animism is a very, very ancient and rudimentary form of understanding. But when you do start to see the electron and quantum field as divinity, it starts to tie up, especially when we move into the second piece of this cycle again. Now, here's the thing. Here's where things get weird. It's like, where are we? So, this loop now around where quantum mechanics are starting to go back into mysticism. Now we're starting again from number one on this cycle because there's so many comparable points to animism. And some people are getting there, and there's quite a few. But now look at the next step, the second step. Now, what's so important also is that ideas of a fundamental substance that everything could be broken down into. It was actually predicted by Vedic traditions, by Hindu mystics, who were saying that this was going to happen. The atom itself was actually named by the ancient Greeks. It was supposed to be for a building block of matter that could never be broken down further. So these was all these ideas were actually already introduced and hypothesized in the second part of the cycle. I feel like that's as far as we are, kind of, in a way. But look at the world today, right? Look at how spirituality currently is. There's people that have kind of already reached this point without, I think, realizing that much. Traditions of India and Vedic Hinduism are rife through Western culture. Ideas of vegetarian diets for moral reasons, ideas of mindfulness, ideas of meditation, ideas of yoga. These are ancient Vedic practices that have been around for thousands, 5,000 years, I want to say, something like that. Judaism predates the entire Abrahamic timeline, but has never been as popular as it is now. Never, ever, ever, ever. It gets even crazier. There is a thing that originated in Indian tradition called Maya. It is the kind of false reality that we live in, and insinuates that where we think we are in this physical reality that we look at is actually fake. It doesn't exist. It's kind of more us trapped in our own perspectives. This idea has persisted through many other evolved spiritual ideas. You find it in Buddhism, Jainism, you'll find it in many other even Greek ideas like Neoplatonism and Hermeticism, and you even find this in Islam, you find it in non-canonical Christianity, Judaism and Kabbalah, that the world itself is an illusion. This is pretty much proven now by quantum mechanics, in that everything you see is 99.999% vibrational activity. It's just see-through electricity. And also in the observer effect, that's proven that particles behave differently when they are perceived or observed or measured by a mind. So again, these topics that are so ancient that it's like predates everything are now being scientifically proven. And look at something like the Tao and Taoism. Take a moment, research the Tao. Tell me that doesn't sound like the undercurrent of electron basic behavior. But here's where things are interesting. The law of attraction, this kind of idea, or even like other spiritual ideas that you come with, where it's just about the energy out is the energy in. That's very much based in these ideas that were set way earlier on. That was why, as I said before, people were trying to create personified, tangible entities to communicate with as an influence of nature. Now, you can believe what you want about this. It's very new age. It's also very pseudoscience. But there is a following for it, and some people, myself included, have had pretty good success with it. You put a certain energy out, you get a certain energy in. Now, this is where I feel like we're moving to, and there's a fringe group of this, kind of on the cusp of the second piece of this cycle, and this is all the neo-paganism stuff. People are trying to bring back Celtic gods and Norse gods and Greek gods, and there is this kind of in the West where people are really trying to bring back that polytheistic ideas, and perhaps that is where we're headed. But I feel like it's going to be more conscious, and it's going to be more aware of what we're doing. It's not that you believe in Zeus, it's not that you necessarily believe in Odin, it's not necessarily that you worship Horus and you actually believe that the sun is being rolled across the sky by Kepri, the dung beetle. You don't believe that, but you're very aware that you're personifying elements in order to communicate with them, putting that energy out in order to manifest or manipulate the fabric of reality, at least in your perspective, which is all that matters anyway. But here's what I think what we should do, and this is the Janthopodism contribution, everyone should start making their own gods, All fine and good. If you're not an imaginative person, I can see why that would be difficult. And then you should go through books and pick one of them that you like the most. Which one resonates with me? Is it Hindu? Is it Egyptian? I want a god of fertility. Should I go look at what was happening in Baltic times? What was the ancient polytheistic Baltic god for fertility? I have no idea. Or what is the Roman god for money? Let me go look that up. If that's great, mix them up. Build your own polytheistic canon to personify the world, but do it. Be aware of what you're doing. Have a fun time. You're building a bridge between yourself and the kind of metaphysical. Just going, instead of praying or hoping or wishing or trying law of attraction. You make this fun little game out of it. Kind of like how superheroes are always made. These characters are superheroes. Jesus was the best one. Jesus is a very powerful one. There's a lot of energy behind Jesus. There's a lot of support from a community for putting hopes and prayers through Jesus. That's why it tends to work for a lot of people, because there's this mass amount of energy in the zeitgeist. But for people who are non-believers, you can still just have a little fun game. If something resonates with you, if a little character resonates with you, use it as a messenger. Because this character I'm making right now, or this character that I've pulled out of this book right now, I'm asking you, go bring me this thing. And how this is supposed to work is the energy out, energy in. If you're having fun, if you kind of go, that's silly, but it's nice, and and as long as there's a positive charge to it, if you feel like it's stupid, then it's not going to work, obviously. But if you, it's all about getting that energy of hee, this is fun, or this is crazy, this is really interesting, this is fascinating, this is what people used to do. If you get into these kind of positive things, slowly but surely you can really crack the code, I think, and really take control of reality using these ancient techniques, which really worked. So that's kind of, I think, the furthest we are right now. But then you can just keep following it around, I think eventually that would just break down and we would we would eventually realize, I think the whole thing as one would be a worship of science and nature as a manifestation of divinity. That's it. Science is the physics is the code that's running the laws, like the formulas that are essential for reality to function, all of which is part of this divinity. Not necessarily a personal guide, but an overall encompassing supreme reality / being / absolute everything, which in my head is just eventually going to be recognized as this mass field of electrons, of which we are just pinpricks of perspectives, focus points, pockets of focus points, which are so insignificant, yet so significant in the way that we are contributing to the evolution of this entire system. And that's exactly why each of us are here, to fulfill a role. The entire, even if you're a science person, you will agree that everything's running on logic. So it's very logical that every piece of evolution was a reaction to an action. That everything happens because there was a step previous that made that step happen, which means that everything that happened is not an accident. It was the most logical, or at least easiest next step for nature to take. It's a streamlined operation, which means your very existence was brought here as a result of something else, and was necessary in order to continue the creation of the thing. It's an overall system. To believe that anything evolutionary or anything in the cosmos is a mistake is to state that you, with your tiny little finite mind, knows more about evolution than the cosmos itself, the infinite universe. People actually think they know more than it. Crazy. People actually think consciousness is some sort of a ceiling of awareness, that human beings have reached the apex. I doubt it. Anyway, that's kind of all I wanted to say. So, in summary, make up your own gods and have fun. If you're having fun, you're doing it right. Thank you for coming to my Jared talk.